So now I'd like to begin the show with long-time contributor Jeff Jordan, and he's part of our Master Modeler series. Jeff, welcome to the show,
Hi, Tom.
and appreciate you taking the time to pull together a presentation. And um, we got an interesting program from you. Maybe we could just start it off here, Phil.
We could if it was all ready to go.
Meanwhile, we'll talk about Morgans.
Yeah,
No, we'll talk about metal snowplows. How's that coming along? Rotary snowplows.
I am so backlogged on structures. I was delighted to get these two finished, but I've got two more backed up behind it. And so it's amazing how long it's taking me to finish one of these. It's a rather elderly kit, and it's turned into a semi-kit, semi-scratch build as I'm replacing 25-year-old parts that are falling apart or warped. And so this snowplow is down the list a bit.
All right, you're on.
Here we go. This started out as a single project, but then I realized that this technique is really very useful for a variety of structures and a variety of media and siding. I had seen kits that have used something like this. For example, Banto models, some of their kits are a plywood core, which you then separately apply siding material. And so when I found a structure I really wanted to try, if you give me the first photograph there, you'll see this structure. I found this in, one of my favorite resources, the 12 volume set on the Rio Grande Southern Railroad. And this is one of the many mills in the Pandora Basin east of Telluride, Colorado. And I really needed a structure like this. And I started looking at kits and realized, heck, I can build that. I don't need anybody to provide me with a kit, but how am I going to do it? And then I remembered the technique I had seen in some kits of using plywood and not, hefty hardware store or lumberyard plywood, but hobbyist plywood. I found on Amazon, for example, they sell you a package of like six 12 by 12 inch, 16th of an inch thick plywood sheets, which are very nice, very, very smooth finish plywood, very durable, and very easy to work with because it's only a 16th of an inch thick. And so cutting out openings is not a major labor. So I decided that the building in the center, the one with the slant roof, was basically my inspiration, though it's a bit deeper than I wanted for the space. Um, I was able, because it's basically just a rectangle with a slanting roof, to just make up some dimensions and use some readily available window castings for the doors and windows. Indeed, one of the things I discovered in doing research for this is you notice all of those windows are white. And I wondered why in the world would the miners be bothered with making white windowsills? And the answer is that's the way they came from the factory. You get a railroad car loaded with windows. They come put together and they come probably in white primer. And so they just stuck them on an otherwise unfinished building. Uh, a couple of other interesting things just to notice about this building is the roof appears to be corrugated material. It's not heavily weathered because this area is remarkably dry. And so you don't get the amount of rust that you might get elsewhere. Also, you notice the building is not rail served at all, though it would be easy to make it rail served if you wanted. There's a road behind it. I believe that is where raw ore is carted in, and then it is removed again with motor vehicles and no railroad cars in this case, that the motor vehicle would drive down to the siding at the base of the Pandora Basin. And that's where it would go to the railroad. But a very typical mine structure. So if you go to the next slide, please. This is just the start. I've laid out, very simply, 4 walls and just traced out where I wanted the openings. One of the nice things about this technique, because the building is going to be sheathed with an exterior siding, the window openings do not have to be absolutely perfect. They have to be big enough to clear your castings. They have to be lined up, especially on a horizontal line, so that you don't get a, higgledy-piggledy windows. But after that, 1/16 of an inch plywood, I literally found this very easy to cut just with some small X-Acto saws, some knives, and you got through it very quickly. And so this is the first wall. The windows have been cut in. And then I buy 1/4-inch basswood sticks at Hobby Lobby. And there's a secret for you. They sell it in 2 different places in Hobby Lobby. Back in the back by the model kits, they have a bin, but those are 2-foot long sticks and they're premium priced. If you go over in the craft aisle, they sell 3-foot long 1/4-inch sticks for 99 cents a stick. And I go through plenty of sticks. You'll see how much reinforcing I do on an O-scale building. This is incidentally O-scale, but this technique is easily usable in HO scale as well, and probably is a little bit less in need of extensive bracing. But in O-scale, that wall is a good size, and the side walls are even bigger, so I reinforce them. Next slide. So here we go. Now you can see the side wall. Again, I just laid out the windows in something that looked about right to me. The interior of these mills had several levels, and the only window that really has a location that you have to think about is the ground floor window. You don't want it too close to the floor or too high. And the door opening was cut for a door casting I had on hand. I have a nice bag full of doors and windows and just rated it to supply. And so you can see here, starting up, cutout wall, and again, the back wall is completely blank because where it's going to go on my layout, you will never see the back wall. If it was going to be turned in such a way that you could see the back wall, you would want some sort of an opening right at the top there, like you saw in the prototype photo, where the raw ore gets carted in, dumped in, loaded by rail cars, whatever. But it has to get in at the top of the mill because these mills work basically by gravity, and the material gets progressively ground finer by gravity advancing it down the way. So you can see the corner blocks there, just glued it together. I happen to like Eileen's tacky glue because it sets quickly but stays soft long enough to enable you to make adjustments. And then it's clamped together. Next slide, please. And so here we go, some more walls. I got the back wall there. Those clamps, those brass clamps you probably recognize, they're from Micromark. I find them very handy, especially in O-scale buildings, that a clamp that's long enough, as you can see, to get the whole back of the building there. And then a clamp up at the top just to catch the top corner. But it's very simple, going together very quickly. Next slide. And then there's the front wall in place, similarly clamped. The reason I didn't use a big clamp there is because they were still on the back, so I had to improvise a little bit. But all 4 walls come together, careful that it's staying nice and square, and gives you the basic structure in just that much time. Next slide. Now, someplace in here, it's probably a little further down, I'll show you how I actually cut up the plywood sheets. But here you can just see I've come along and applying bracing, both horizontal underneath those weights there is a cross piece, the long diagonals, which will provide a base to glue the roof to, and so it stiffens the structure with both top and bottom and middle horizontal pieces, and then the diagonals all the way around there for the roof. Another slide. Okay, here it is. This is kind of a mixed message. I found this on Amazon, and it's very small, but it worked very nicely for cutting those plywood sheets until it didn't work at all. I sort of suspect it ingested too much sawdust, and that killed it. So I'm thinking I may send off for a different one and try it again. But a very handy little tool. As you can see, it's got that slider on there, which is calibrated for straight cuts or angled cuts. It comes with a fence as well, but the fence isn't useful for at least the size of the materials I was using. But was a nifty way to cut up the plywood until it wouldn't work anymore. And then I found out that cutting the plywood by hand with a saw wasn't terrible, but this is faster. Next slide. Okay, so there's a ridge pole going in place, and again, the big clamp holding everything together until the tacky glue sets up. And the tacky glue does set very quickly. One of the things I like to do is have two projects going at once, and I'll alternate back and forth while the glue is setting on one. I'll work on the other one. Indeed, you can see peeking out in the back there are windows for a different kit. Next slide. Okay, a critical tool here, because this structure is sided with coffee stirrers. Now I get 1,000 coffee stirrers off of Amazon for $10, a penny per coffee stirrer. This structure, I estimate, used ultimately 300 coffee stirrers, so $3 worth of a siding. I just used my chopper, first chopping off just the rounded end. And then I did make a little bit of a jig. You can see that there's the two screw fixtures on either side that you can clamp something in there, so you can clamp it at exactly the right distance. And so you can get a real assembly line going here, put the coffee stirrer in, chop off the end, push it down to the stop, chop it again, and keep going and cut lots and lots of coffee stirrers, at least for this project where I estimated how many I needed, and I knew I needed a lot. So, next slide. Staining them. Hunter line stain, and in this, it works just fine. There are a number of ways people stain them. I've seen people, fill a tub or a tube and so forth. I think this is less wasteful, that very little of the stain goes to waste. But and once I got the hang of it, I could dip several at one time, and then just give them a quick wipe, set them aside, and again stain a great many in a very short period of time. The one thing I did discover is that I preferred them, or the color, if they were dipped twice to get a little bit darker color on the wood. That is partially a function of what kind of wood was used to make the coffee stirrers. I tried a couple of different ones. They stain similarly, but some stain a little darker, some stain a little lighter. And even within the set, you get some variety, which I think looks really good when you're finished, because this is, after all, in reality, in the prototype, a bare wood structure. No paint, no finish. They just nail up the wood sidings and get to grinding ore very quickly. And so there's a whole bunch of stirrers. There were many more ultimately, but that was one batch I did one evening. Next slide. Applying the stirrers. Now, the first thing you'll notice is underneath my hand there is the plywood. It's no longer light plywood colored. I was concerned of the possibility that the coffee stirrers in places would not fit super tight and that there might be gaps, and I didn't want the light colored plywood showing through. So I just, again, took some Hunter line stain and literally just took a big brush and slopped it on just to get the plywood away from its natural color. Um, and then this is actually this is the back of the building because this was a new technique for me using it on a whole building. I started with the back. Uh, Again, because the back wasn't going to show, I possibly could have just said, to heck with it. I won't even do any more than just stain the plywood, but I wanted to use it as a test to see how it worked. And so I did the back wall first and the first row across the bottom first. Again, you have to decide on the size of the boards. You certainly can't tell from the photographs what size the boards ought to be. The longest lumber I've ever been able to purchase, rough sawn, was 16 feet long. They're used as fence boards. And so I said, okay, I don't think it could be any longer than that. So let's go with a 16 foot, which turns out to be 4 inches and is comfortably inside the length of a coffee stirrer. And so you just take the stained coffee stirrers and starting with the bottom row, because you've got the edge of the building to keep things square, and they are quite square. Occasionally I would throw away one that was too badly hockey stick shaped, but otherwise they would go in place one right after another. And you had the bottom edge of the structure to also make sure everything was staying square. So it was not hard to keep it square. I think I also put a rule with a pencil across the top just to keep things in check, but I found it very easy to keep them straight. And again, using the tacky glue, applied tacky glue on the back of each board as I went, rather than trying to paint it on the back of the building, and just snapped each one in place. And again, using those wheel weights would just advance the wheel weight onto the next board as I applied the boards. Again, going surprisingly quickly when you consider I had 300 of these to get on there, that in a couple of evenings, I had the whole building sheathed with coffee stirrers. Now, this is the easy wall because there are no openings in it. Go to the next slide here. See, we got a picture. Oh, okay, that's coming up. Let's skip ahead one more. There you go. That it had to fit the windows and doors in. And so there I ended up gluing the coffee stirrers when they were on the edge. I would let them overlap slightly and glue them on good and hard. And then the tops and bottoms were cut to length to fit. Oops, lost our presentation here. And then I let the glue set up good and hard overnight. And then with an X-Acto knife, I could easily carve away the excess coffee stirrer to give you a good opening, testing occasionally with the window casting. And again, the beauty of the Tichy and or Grant Line window castings is they give you a generous amount of trim around the edge, which covers the cutout for the window openings. So you can see the windows are in here, the door casting is in, and then there's just a little bit of trim. Again, I'm sure they didn't spend a lot of time trimming out these buildings. In doing the corners, I was careful to just trim the boards so there is no corner trim because, again, I just don't think when they're knocking together a mill that they're going to be fancy. I used it just around the door edge because you needed some sort of mounting for the door, and then the edges of the roof, again, to finish the edge of the roof. But that's it. So it's a remarkably simple structure. Now, the roof, which also leads us into the next structure. I had earlier this year, matter of fact, at the start of the year, Mike McCarville had sent around a survey asking what people wanted. And I said, Mike, please make some of your kits in O scale. And he did. He made the Pandora powerhouse in O scale, and it's completely covered with corrugated siding made by, I think it's called Full Circle Models. And it's a heavy paper stock which is embossed with the corrugations. It's very easy to use. And so having first built Mike's building, which you can just see peeking out in the background there, there'll be better pictures of it in a moment. I used the corrugated siding material, which comes in long strips. And I cut it into individual sheets and then just applied it working from the bottom to the top. Again, I applied some horizontal lines to the plywood roof to help me keep it in line. And I like using rubber cement, using the permanent rubber cement technique, which is put the rubber cement on the surface and put it on the back of the card, let it set until it's only slightly tacky, and then put it in place. But you got to be accurate, because when you do it that way, you don't get a lot of adjustment. But I was very happy with the corrugated metal roof that I got as a result. That ultimately is weathered with pan pastels as well. Next slide, please. There's the building from the other side. And also you can see the Mike McCarville powerhouse abutted up. Again, similar to the original prototype photograph, where there was an additional rectangular building on the side of the mill, though this is a little bit bigger. I had built Mike's building and I thought it went very harmoniously with this building, using the same, corrugated siding and weathering with pan pastels. Next slide. There's the whole building, and you can see it has a little ventilator. It comes with the chimney, comes with all of the window as large pre-cut strips. Those are not wooden windows. They are like, the resin impregnated paper, pre-cut, pre-stamped, but they stain well and went in place very nicely. I was very happy with that building. Indeed, that's what encouraged me to use that same siding material on the mill. Also, the photograph we saw a little earlier is kind of in the middle there of a prototype corrugated metal building. That's a building that's just near where I live, and I took some pictures of it just to get a feel for what the corrugated siding looked like close up. The overlap on the edges, the overlap top to bottom, a little bit of what the weathering looks like, though this is more weathered than the prototype building in my neighborhood. It gave me the sense that all I wanted to do with the sheets itself was darken it a bit. That the technique is, once this is all glued in place and dried, and before the windows were in place, I shot all the corrugated material with a clear matte spray, both to protect it and to give it a little bit more tooth. And then over that, using the sponge applicators, applied pan pastel, emphasizing the edges, both the vertical and horizontal edges. So I went to all that work to have individual panels, and so it really brings out that there are individual panels, and that the body of the panels are just very lightly overcoated with a darker gray, and gives you some variation, gives you a little bit of weathering effect, but not terribly beaten up. Again, looking at photographs on the San Juans, it's just not a lot of rain, and therefore you don't get those heavily rusted effects that you see in some other places. Next slide. Okay, so having successfully built the mill using that technique, I came on another subject, again, out of the RGS story. This is Rico, Colorado, the well-known station on the left there. But on the right, in the back there, is a very seldom modeled structure. Indeed, I can't recall having seen anybody else having modeled it. It's another powerhouse. It was built in 1925 to provide electrical power to the mines directly behind Rico. And lo and behold, they built it and they operated it for a year or two. And then the local power company brought power lines all the way over the mountains. And so all of a sudden, commercial electric power was available from the power company. And it was a lot cheaper to buy that than to run your own powerhouse. So the thing only operated as a powerhouse for a couple of years, but it remained there for many years afterwards, they speculate it might have been used for storage or what have you. One of the distinctive things about it, those windows, and you can kind of see on the roof there are three chimneys, which I speculate led to three boilers inside the building. And so I said, oh, this is an interesting building. Let's see if I can build that. But of course, there are no plans, and the photographs, there are a few more, but they're not much better than this one. So I had to figure out, how am I going to figure out the size of this thing? Well, the answer is, though this picture, the station is more obstructed, there are other pictures with both buildings in it that show the station on the left a little better. I already have that structure on my layout. And so I was able to measure it to determine its dimensions and then compare it to using the photograph and just a ruler to extrapolate the dimensions of the power station, recognizing that it's set back a little bit further than the station, but not much, because those railroad cars are on a siding that runs behind the station and in front of the power station. So it's that close. And so I took a guess at the dimensions and just made a cardboard replica and fiddled with it a little bit till I was happy with the dimensions that I had worked out. And then again, laid out those dimensions on the same plywood material that I had used for the mill. And again, using the saw until it conked out, just cut out the sidings. The other thing I did is, though this building, you can't tell really well from this photo, it's quite a bit deeper. I did it as a semi-flat. It has about 2.5 inches of depth on my layout. The real building obviously was much deeper, but it filled a space just perfectly on my layout. I had a hole for a long time. I said, what am I going to put in there? And I discovered this photograph and realized that that building filled the gap beautifully. And it was an unusual building with that unusual roof line, those really unusual looking windows. And so off I go, knock out the sides from the plywood stock. And then let's go to the next slide here. I don't have a lot of assembly photographs though, but here's the siding material. The full circle models siding comes in the package as a strip, like you see at the top. That one may have a panel or two cut off of it already. And then they also include plain stock, which is very useful for the cap on roofs, for example. But that's the way it comes. And Mike McCarville in his instructions says you can just put glue on the back of it and stick it on the building. And maybe in smaller scales, you'd be happy with that. But I said, no, I'm cutting it into individual panels. So next slide. And here we go. The layout. I ultimately settled on about a 3-foot 3-inch panel with 3 feet exposed, and the last 3 inches of it would be the overlap. And so marked it, used a little square, and then just a sharp X-Acto knife, and you can cut out a whole bunch of them very quickly, slicing up the sheet after sheet into individual panels. Next slide. And then again, they're applied just like the roof on the mill building. Again, I ruled lines to just give me guidance and making sure everything stood straight and square. More interesting part of this construction is the windows. Again, I had no dimensions to work from other than my estimates of the building. And so I had to make some estimates, and then things began to fit. For example, on the right, there are 5 windows, and if you did each one 3 feet wide, it fit beautifully. So I think I was close to the original dimensions. And then the way I made these windows, I owe a debt of gratitude to a fellow who did a clinic at the National Narrow Gauge Convention on building windows using the transparent stock as a structural component. So what I did was, when the building was just bare plywood, I cut the window openings, including the 2 little protrusions there after the 2nd and 4th window, and just had the openings. Then I took clear stock, evergreen styrene, and measured and cut it to fit the hole precisely, just exactly inside the hole for the windows. Then going through my stock of evergreen styrene strips, I just sorted until I found some strip material that looked about right. If you look at that prototype photo, you can see the window sills are quite heavy. And white again, probably for the same reason that they just bought the windows and they came in white primer. And so it was easy to lay out, for example, the right-hand one, there's only 3 pieces of strip around the outside perimeter there, the last part being under the door sill or the door trim. And so there's a long strip on the top, a long strip on the bottom, and then a vertical strip on the end. Similarly, cut more vertical strips for the other windows. You can even see the little tick marks I made to space them properly. Then the trick was you glue this together by putting the whole thing face down on your working surface. So you put the strip in place, then you lay the transparent material over it, spacing it in such a way that it's on the plastic transparent material and leaves you a lip to install the window into the structure. And I roughly split that 50-50 over the window and hanging out as an edge, and just used liquid plastic cement and a very fine applicator and just touch it in a couple of places, and the capillary action, it just zips right in, glues it together very securely. And then the other side obviously was a bit more cutting because of the variations in the top sills there. And I had that, and then I said, that looks pretty good, but those sheets are much too big. And from the photographs, you can't tell at all what the glazing looks like. And so I decided, well, let's try horizontal. And so that's just very fine, like 1x2 stock, HO scale 1x2 stock, cut and fit, and then just glued at each end with a drop of liquid plastic cement. And I was pretty happy with that. I might go back and split them with another vertical one to make the panes a bit smaller, but it looks so much like the photograph just as it is. I thought I was pretty happy with that. And then these are still loose, as you can see, so they're not tight and there's shadows around the edge. I put them in place for the photograph, but then I took them back out and weathered the siding material the same way as before. Coat of matte clear varnish, and then weathered with pan pastels, then glued the windows in place. And so there's the cutting technique, and there's the windows in place. And then if you skip ahead, I think one more, and there she is in place. You can see the weathering effect on there. The photograph doesn't quite do justice to it. It becomes lighter in the photograph than it is in person, but you can see the gray effect on there. And if you look at that left-hand roof panel, you can see I weathered the roof panel more than the vertical panels, and it's got its distinctive 3 chimneys on there as well. And it's like, as I said, 2.5 inches deep. And you can see the spot I had there. It just fits in there perfectly and matches the proportions, the dimensions of the prototype photograph as well. The next trick will be to begin to build the road that goes between the 2 buildings and up the hillside behind it, most of which will be painted backdrop. And I think that's all my slides. Yep, that's it. So that's the technique. I really like this technique because it's very easy, it's inexpensive, it's forgiving, it's an easy way to get into scratch building structures, and it's not intimidating. And also, one of my scratch building mottos is never be afraid, if you're not happy with the part, to throw it away and try again, especially when inexpensive materials. I have buildings that I've built twice because I cut the parts once and didn't like them and cut them a second time and it looked better. And this one with, inexpensive, forgiving materials, very easy. And you can get a variety of siding. So there are other kinds of siding materials out there that you could use for this as well. So
Great job, Jeff. And
thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Jeff Jordan?
Hey, Jeff, two questions for you.
Sure.
First, what are the What are the coffee stirs as a scale dimension for you?
Yes, they are great for O scale because the ones that I get, they scale out as 1 foot wide. And as I said, once you cut off the rounded ends and a little bit more, they're a little bit more than 16 feet in O scale. I didn't worry about the thickness because you can't see the thickness.
Can't really see it, yeah. And then the other question is for the siding, were there ever any pictures of those siding panels being offset? Because I noticed both on the one that you showed and then the one that you did, you lined up the panels, the verticals are all lined up, like the seams.
Yep.
When you would panel those, normally these days you'd see them offset, or maybe it was just they didn't care because of the weather.
I don't know if we go back to the photograph about in the middle of my presentation of that prototype gray building with the siding on it. I'm not so sure that they're offset there either.
Yeah, I was traveling, so I wasn't necessarily looking at the picture, so I wasn't sure.
Any other questions for Jeff? Yeah. Well, it's a great technique and makes for a very robust build when you use plywood. I'm going to experiment with the 16th inch. I'm building one now with 1/8 inch, and it's a much tougher cut to put in the windows, but as soon as this program's over, I'm going to order some 16th inch and try that.
Yeah, and then, because I know you already do a robust reinforcement anyhow.
Yeah.
So using the 1/4 inch sticks, I find the 16th plywood is plenty strong enough, and with a little bit of reinforcement, it does not oil can, flex in and out.
Yeah.
So
The key is the 1/4 inch.
Yeah, I'm happy with it.
I'm going to veneer a building with Larkspur Monster Works laser etched veneer, a brick or a stone, and it's not strong enough on its own as basswood. So I need a plywood core, but I'm going to try your 16th inch. So that was my takeaway from this evening. And
It's good stuff, and it's available on Amazon.
Jeff,
Yes.
Pat here. That saw you had, I had one of those. I found that if you get over a 1/16 of an inch stick, it would not handle it with that motor. But if you put a shop vac attached to a bottom plate on that, I don't think there's any way you could get it from the sides or the front and back, because when I looked at it, it didn't have one. You'll get the sawdust away from that motor, because if you don't get it away from that motor, it gets hot. So if you can get it away from there, you might get better performance out of it.
Yeah,
I did have one.
I was thinking of taking it apart and running a vacuum all over and see if it will resume operating, but I may have cooked it.
It will.
Okay.
But it won't handle anything thicker than I tried it, some of the material I had, and boy, did it quit in a hurry.
No, it comfortably cut the 16th of an inch plywood.
Yep.
And also you see those little 1/4 inch sticks, it cut them too.
Yep. It has an attachment on the end to put a sanding unit or a chuck on it, so you can.
That's a different one. I did not get the one with the
shaft on the
chuck
side.
for drill bits and sanding. This is strictly the blade.
Yep.
Micromark has a nice one too. I've had one from Micromark for 20
those
years.
are good.
It's a cheapie though, but
it's definitely I think an element of you get what you pay for, and I didn't pay very much for this one.
All right. Well, okay. Thank you, Jeff, and
Welcome.
appreciate you giving a presentation this evening.